I never imagined that my life would take such a dramatic turn that Tuesday in April. The Buenos Aires sun streamed through the kitchen window as I prepared breakfast, absent-mindedly caressing my 2-month-old belly. Martín, my husband, had gone on a business trip to Córdoba the day before, and I was alone at home, enjoying the tranquility of the morning. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. When I opened the door, I found the forced smile of Marta, my mother-in-law. "Surprise, Lucia," he exclaimed with an enthusiasm that he did not reach his eyes. "I was passing by and thought I'd visit you." His presence disturbed me. Our relationship had always been strained, but since we announced my pregnancy, his attitude had become even colder. I invited her in, more out of courtesy than desire. While serving the mate, Marta began to talk about the house, subtly criticizing my way of maintaining it. "Oh, Lucia, when are you going to learn to do things right? Look at those curtains, they need urgent washing." His comments, while hurtful, were nothing new. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was Martín's mother. Suddenly, Marta changed the subject. "Hey, you know what? I found some old photos of Martín in the basement. Do you want to see them?" The proposal surprised me. In the 2 years we had lived in that house, we had never used the basement for anything important. However, the idea of seeing photos of Martín as a child excited me. We went down the stairs to the basement, Marta in front and I followed her carefully. The smell of humidity and confinement hit me as soon as we entered. "They're over here," Marta said, moving toward the back of the room. I followed her, curious, until I heard the click of the door closing behind me. I turned around, confused, only to see Marta on the other side of the door, with an expression I will never forget. "I'm sorry, Lucia, but it's for the good of my son," he said with a cold voice that made my blood run cold. "I can't let you ruin his life with that baby." Before I could react, I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. Panic overcame me instantly. I hit the door with all my strength, screaming Marta's name, begging her to let me out. My screams mixed with the sound of their retreating footsteps. "Marta, please. I'm pregnant. You can't do this to me." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. I spent the next few hours alternating between banging on the door until my hands hurt and screaming until I was voiceless. The basement, which had previously only seemed uncomfortable to me, had now become my prison. The darkness was almost total, only interrupted by a small ray of light that came through a dirty window near the ceiling. As the hours passed, the initial fear transformed into a mixture of rage and despair. How could Marta do this to me? Did he really think he was protecting Martín? My mind frankly ran through every interaction we'd had, looking for signs I'd missed. I remembered the disapproving looks when Martín and I announced our engagement, the scathing comments about my job as a university literature professor, the constant comparisons with Martín's ex-girlfriend. But never, not even in my worst nightmares, would I have imagined that it would reach this extreme. Night came, and with it, the cold of the basement became more intense. I curled up in a corner, hugging myself and my unborn baby. "Everything will be okay," I whispered, although I didn't know if I was trying to convince the baby or myself. "Dad will be back soon and find us." The noises from the house above me became painfully evident. Every creak, every step, made me lift my head in hope, only to sink into deeper disappointment when nothing happened. Hunger began to take its toll, and thirst became unbearable. In the darkness of the basement, my thoughts wandered to Martin. When would you return from your trip? Would he realize something was wrong? I imagined her face, her warm smile, the way her eyes lit up when I told her we were expecting a baby. "Please, Martin, come back soon," I murmured in the dark. The second day was torture. The thirst had become unbearable, and the hunger made me nauseous. I scanned the basement looking for something, anything that could help me escape or at least survive. I found some old boxes, rusty tools, but nothing I could use to open the door. In a corner, I discovered an antique faucet. With shaking hands, I turned it, praying it would work. After a few agonizing moments, a stream of water came out. I drank desperately, grateful for this small miracle. At least he wouldn't die of thirst. The hours dragged on endlessly. I tried to stay calm for the sake of my baby, but fear and anxiety consumed me. What if Marta told Martine that I had left? What if no one was looking for me? These dark thoughts tormented me, robbing me of sleep and hope. In moments of lucidity, I tried to think of a plan. Screaming was useless, the house was isolated enough that no one could hear me. I tried to pick the lock with the tools I found, but only managed to hurt my hands. The third day, I heard Marta moving around the house. I gathered all my strength and screamed, begging him to let me out. Marta, please. The baby. Think of your grandson. But there was no response. Just the crushing silence of the basement. That night, I cried until I ran out of tears. I talked to my baby, promising him that we would get out of there, that we would see the sun again, that he would meet his father. I clung to that promise like it was a lifeline in the middle of an ocean of despair. On the fourth day, something changed. I heard movement above, but it was different. Stronger, more erratic. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be Martin? I gathered what little strength I had left and began shouting and banging on the door with renewed energy. Martin. I'm here. In the basement. My voice, hoarse from disuse and dehydration, sounded strange even to my own ears. But I kept screaming, fueled by new hope. The footsteps approached the basement door. I held my breath, my heart beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. And then, the voice he had been longing to hear for the past 4 days echoed on the other side of the door. Lucia. Are you there? Martin's voice, confused and alarmed, was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Yes. Yes, I'm here. Your mother locked me up. The words came out in a rush, mixed with sobs of relief. I heard Martine struggle with the lock, cursing under his breath. After what seemed like an eternity, the door opened, and light flooded the basement, momentarily blinding me. Martin was there, his face a mixture of horror, confusion and relief. I threw myself into his arms, crying uncontrollably. He hugged me tightly, repeating over and over, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I don't understand what happened. As he led me out of the basement, I told him among sobs what had happened. His face went from confusion to anger and then to a determination I had never seen before. Let's go to the hospital right now, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. We'll take care of my mother later. Leaving the house was like being reborn. The fresh air, the sun on my skin, everything seemed new and beautiful. As Martine drove to the hospital, I looked out the window at the streets of Buenos Aires, promising myself that I would never take my freedom for granted again. At the hospital, the doctors examined me thoroughly. To our relief, the baby was fine. Dehydrated and weak, but alive and with my son safe, I finally allowed myself to relax in the hospital bed. Martine did not leave my side for a moment. He called the police, who began the search for Marta. He assured me over and over again that he would never allow something like this to happen again, that he would protect me and our baby with his life. That night, as Martin slept in a chair next to my hospital bed, I reflected on the past few days. The fear, the despair, but also the strength I didn't know I had. I caressed my belly, silently thanking my baby for giving me the strength to survive. The future was uncertain. I knew there would be investigations, difficult questions, and decisions to be made. But for now, in the safety of that hospital room, with Martin by my side and our baby growing inside me, I allowed myself to feel hope. Tomorrow would be another day. A day to begin to heal, to face what had happened and to build a safe future for our family. But for that night, I was simply grateful to be alive, free, and loved. The second day of my confinement began with the distant sound of everyday life filtering through the basement walls. I heard the garbage truck passing down the street, the neighbors' dogs barking, and the distant murmur of Buenos Aires traffic waking up. These familiar sounds, previously unnoticed, now mocked me, reminding me of the freedom that had been taken from me. I rose from the corner where I had spent the night, my muscles protesting from having slept on the cold, hard floor. The darkness of the basement was less intense during the day, but even so, I could barely make out the shapes of the objects around me. I approached the small window near the ceiling, standing on my tips to try to see something of the outside world. I could only see a patch of blue sky and the branches of a tree swaying in the breeze. That vision, so close and at the same time so unattainable, caused a lump in my throat. Hunger began to make itself felt strongly. I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast the day before, and my body, now responsible for also nourishing my baby, was protesting loudly. I explored the basement in more detail, hoping to find something, anything, I could eat. Among dusty boxes and old furniture, I found a can of peaches in syrup. The expiration date had passed years ago, but in desperation, I pried it open with a rusty tool I found lying in a corner. The sweet taste of the peaches, although somewhat metallic due to the time, was a momentary relief to my empty stomach. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, knowing it might be the only thing I had to eat for a long time. I saved the syrup, thinking I might need it later to stay hydrated. As the day progressed, the reality of my situation began to sink in deeper. How long would Marta keep me here? What would you say to Martine when you returned? My mind was spinning with possible scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. I imagined Marta making up a story about how I had left, abandoning Martine and the baby. Would he believe her? The silence of the basement was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the house and my own movements. I began to speak loudly, first whispering and then louder, only to hear a human voice. I was talking to my baby, telling him stories about how Martin and I met, our plans for the future, anything to stay healthy. Your dad and I met in college, you know, I said, caressing my still flat belly. He studied engineering and I studied literature. We crossed paths in the library one rainy day. I continued with the story, recreating every detail in my mind, clinging to those happy memories like a lifeline in the midst of this sea of despair. As the day progressed, the heat in the basement became stifling. The air was stale and humid, making breathing increasingly difficult. I was worried about how this would affect the baby. I tried to stay calm, remembering what I had read about stress during pregnancy, but it was an almost impossible task under these circumstances. In the afternoon, I heard footsteps upstairs. My heart raced, hoping it was someone who could help me. I screamed at the top of my lungs, banging on the door until my hands hurt. But the footsteps simply passed me by, ignoring my pleas or perhaps not listening to them at all. The disappointment was overwhelming. When night fell, the darkness became absolute. Without any light source, I felt completely disoriented. The sounds in the basement seemed to be amplified, the dripping of a distant pipe, the creaking of wood, and I even thought I heard the scampering of little paws. Rats? The thought gave me chills. I tried to sleep, but the fear and discomfort made it impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, terrifying images flooded my mind. She saw Martine returning home, finding it empty, believing that she had abandoned him. I imagined my baby growing up without knowing me, believing that his mother had left him. These thoughts tortured me, keeping me in a constant state of anxiety. The third day came with a new wave of despair. The thirst had become unbearable, and the hunger made me dizzy. I crawled over to the faucet I had discovered the first day, praying it still worked. To my relief, a stream of water came out when I turned it. I drank greedily, not caring about the stagnant, metallic taste. At that moment, it seemed like the most delicious water I had ever tasted. With some fluid in my system, my mind cleared enough to come up with an escape plan. I examined every corner of the basement, looking for an exit, a tool, anything that could help me. I found some old boxes full of books and papers. I looked through them frankly, hoping to find something useful, but most of them were just old invoices and documents. Among the papers, I found some old photos. They were from Martine when he was a child, playing in the patio of this same house. Seeing his childish face, so similar to the man I loved, brought a new wave of tears to my eyes. How could his own mother do this to us? How could he be so cruel? As the day progressed, I began to feel the effects of lack of food and stress on my body. I had frequent dizziness and felt weak. I became increasingly worried about my baby. Would I be getting the nutrients I needed? Guilt gnawed at me for not being able to protect him properly. In an attempt to remain hopeful, I began to plan what I would do when I got out of there. I imagined meeting Martin again, how I would tell him everything that had happened, how together we would overcome this trauma. I visualized the birth of our baby, healthy and strong despite everything. These thoughts gave me strength to continue fighting. The fourth day brought with it a new form of torment, uncertainty about the weather. With no natural light or way to measure the hours, my perception of time was completely distorted. How long had he really been here? Days? Weeks? The disorientation was overwhelming. My routine had become mechanical: wake up, if I'd managed to sleep at all, drink water from the tap, scan the basement for anything I might have missed, try to make noise so someone would hear me, and then go back to it. Curling up in my corner, talking to my baby and praying for a rescue. On one of my walks through the basement, I stumbled upon a stack of old newspapers. I flipped through them, looking for something to occupy my mind. I found an unsolved crossword puzzle and took it as a gift from heaven. Using a chewed-up pencil I found in the rubble, I began to figure it out. It was a trivial task, but it gave me purpose, something to focus on besides my desperate situation. While solving the crossword puzzle, my mind wandered to my students at the university. What would they have told you about my absence? I imagined their confused, perhaps worried faces. I thought about my colleagues, my friends. Would anyone besides Martin have realized something was wrong? Hunger had become a constant pain in my stomach. I rummaged through the boxes, hoping to find something else to eat, but no luck. The thought of eating anything I could find on the basement floor crossed my mind, but I quickly dismissed it, thinking of the risks to my pregnancy. In the moments of greatest desperation, I found myself talking to Marta, as if she could hear me. Why, Marta? Why are you doing this to us? He's your grandson, your family. Please let me out. My pleas were lost in the silence of the basement, unanswered. The night of the fourth day was particularly difficult. The cold had intensified, and my body, weakened by lack of food and stress, was shaking uncontrollably. I wrapped myself in an old tablecloth I found in one of the boxes, but it offered little protection from the damp cold of the basement. In the middle of the night, I thought I heard a noise upstairs. I jumped up, ignoring the dizziness that came over me, and began to scream and bang on the door with renewed strength. Help! I'm down here. Please help. But, as many times before, there was no response. The silence that followed was more painful than any noise. The fifth day began with new determination. I decided that I could no longer wait passively to be rescued. I had to do something, anything, to get out of there. I examined the door carefully, looking for any weaknesses in the structure. I used every tool I could find in the basement to try to pick the lock, but to no avail. Frustrated and exhausted, I sat on the floor, leaning my back against the cold wall. I closed my eyes, trying to control my breathing and calm the frantic thoughts that threatened to overwhelm me. It was then that I felt something, an almost imperceptible movement in my belly. At first, I thought I had imagined it. It was too early to feel the baby, right? But there it was again, a slight flutter, like the touch of a butterfly. Tears began to fall down my cheeks, but this time from joy and amazement. In the midst of all this darkness, my baby was sending me a message of hope. You're there, right, my love? I whispered, caressing my belly. We are strong, you and I. We are going to get out of this together. That small moment of connection with my baby renewed my strength. I couldn't give up, not when I had a life depending on me. The rest of the day was spent alternating between escape attempts and periods of rest. Every time I felt ready to give up, I remembered that little movement in my belly and found the strength to keep going. I talked constantly to my baby, telling him about the outside world, promising him that soon we would see the sun together. As the day progressed, I noticed that the sounds above had changed. There was more movement, more noise. Would Martine have returned? My heart raced at the possibility. I started screaming again, with all the strength I had left. "Martin! I'm down here. In the basement." And then, I heard it. Footsteps approaching the basement door. A voice, his voice, calling my name with a mix of confusion and alarm. "Lucia? Are you there?" The relief I felt in that moment was indescribable. Tears of joy ran down my face as I responded, "Yes. Yes, I'm here. Your mother locked me up." The next few moments were a blur of emotions. I heard Martin struggle with the lock, cursing under his breath. When the door finally opened, the light that flooded the basement momentarily blinded me. And there he was, my Martin, with an expression of horror and relief on his face. I threw myself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. He hugged me tightly, repeating over and over, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I don't understand what happened." As he led me out of the basement, I tearfully told him everything that had happened. His face went from confusion to anger to a determination I had never seen before. "Let's go to the hospital right now," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "We'll take care of my mother later." Leaving the house was like being reborn. The fresh air, the sun on my skin, everything seemed new and beautiful. As Martin drove to the hospital, I looked out the window at the streets of Buenos Aires, promising myself that I would never take my freedom for granted again. At the hospital, the doctors examined me thoroughly. To our relief, the baby was fine. Dehydrated and weak, but alive and with my son safe, I finally allowed myself to relax in the hospital bed. Martin did not leave my side for a moment. He called the police, who began the search for Marta. He assured me over and over again that he would never allow something like this to happen again, that he would protect me and our baby with his life. Understood. You will continue with the expansion of Section 3, Fight to Survive, developing in Spanish with at least 2,800 words. Artifact, Section 3, Fight to Survive, the third day of my confinement in the basement dawned with a renewed determination in my heart. Although the fear and despair were still there, latent, I decided I couldn't afford to give up. For my baby, for Martin and for myself, I had to fight to survive. The darkness of the basement no longer seemed so impenetrable to me. My eyes had become accustomed to the darkness, and I could distinguish shapes and shadows that had previously gone unnoticed. With this new insight, I began to explore my prison in more detail, looking for anything that could help me survive or, hopefully, escape. The faucet I had discovered the day before became my lifesaver. The water, although with a slight metallic taste, was drinkable and allowed me to stay hydrated. I found an old bucket that, although dusty, was used to store water. I cleaned it as best I could with a piece of cloth I took from my t-shirt and filled it, making sure to have a reserve in case the faucet stopped working. Hunger was a more difficult problem to solve. I rummaged through the dusty boxes and shelves, hoping to find something edible. After hours of searching, my perseverance was rewarded. Behind a stack of old magazines, I found a can of peaches in syrup. The label was faded and the expiration date had long passed, but in my situation, I couldn't afford to be picky. I opened the can with an old knife I found among the tools, cutting my fingers in the process. The sweet taste of peaches in my mouth was like a little piece of heaven. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, knowing that I had to portion this precious food source. I saved the syrup, knowing it would provide me with the calories and sugar needed to stay strong. As the hours passed, the inactivity and confinement began to take their toll on me. My body ached from sleeping on the cold, hard floor, and my muscles felt numb. I decided to create an exercise routine to stay active and prevent my body from becoming even weaker. I walked from one end of the basement to the other, stretching, and even improvised some yoga exercises I remembered from classes I used to attend. During my walks, I counted my steps and recited poems out loud. As a literature teacher, I had a vast repertoire of verses memorized, and these became my anchor to sanity. I recited Borges, Neruda, Storni, letting the words fill the oppressive silence of the basement. In the night I see your light, / in the night I hear your voice, / in the night you created a sky / and a handful of stars / and an immense desire, he whispered Storni's verses, imagining the starry sky that he could not see. As the hours passed, my mind wandered to Martin. Where would I be now? Had his business trip ended? Would you be worried about me? I imagined scenarios where he would come home, discover my absence, and move heaven and earth to find me. These thoughts gave me hope, kept me fighting. I also thought about my baby, that little life that was growing inside me, oblivious to the danger that surrounded us. I spoke to him in a low voice, promising him that we would get out of there, that we would see the sun together, that he would meet his father. These conversations with my unborn child became a ritual, a way to keep hope alive. The cold in the basement was relentless, especially at night. I found some old blankets in a closet, which smelled musty and were full of dust, but provided minimal warmth. I would wrap myself in them, creating a little cocoon of relative comfort in a corner of the basement. As the days went by, my mind began to play tricks on me. The sounds of the house above me were amplified in my imagination. Every creak, every distant thump, made me jump, thinking someone was coming to rescue me. But it was always a false alarm, and each disappointment eroded my hope a little more. To maintain my sanity, I began to talk out loud, telling myself stories, recreating scenes from my past life. I remembered my childhood in Rosario, the summers at my grandparents' house, the day I met Martín at college. These memories became my mental escape from the reality of the basement. I sang too, my voice hoarse from lack of use echoing off the concrete walls. Lullabies that my mother sang to me, folk songs I learned in school, even the Argentine national anthem. Singing not only helped keep my morale high, but it also allowed me to exercise my voice, in case I had the opportunity to scream for help. In my most lucid moments, I tried to plan my escape. I examined every inch of the door, looking for weaknesses in the lock or hinges. I tried to use the tools I had found to pick the lock, but only managed to hurt my hands and break the tip of a screwdriver. The small window near the ceiling became my target. It was too small for me to get through, but I thought that if I could break it, maybe I could get a neighbor's attention. I spent hours stacking boxes and old furniture, trying to build a tower high enough to reach. But each attempt ended with the boxes collapsing, and me falling to the ground, frustrated and in pain. The hunger became more and more unbearable. The canned peaches were long gone, and my stomach grew constantly. I started chewing pieces of paper from old magazines to trick my brain and calm the empty feeling in my stomach. The taste was horrible, but at least it gave me something to do. In my darkest moments, when fear and despair threatened to overwhelm me, I focused on my breathing. I inhaled deeply, held it for a few seconds, and then exhaled slowly. This simple act of conscious breathing helped me calm down and regain focus. As the days went by, I noticed changes in my body. My hands, once soft and manicured, were now rough and cut from my attempts at escape. My skin felt dry and tight, and I could feel my bones becoming more prominent under my skin. But what worried me most was my pregnancy. Without adequate nutrition and under conditions of extreme stress, I feared for my baby's health. To distract myself from these dark thoughts, I began to plan for the future. I imagined what the baby's room would be like, the colors we would choose, the books I would read to him. I thought about the names that Martín and I had discussed. I visualized what it would be like to hold our son in my arms for the first time. These dreams became my refuge, my escape from the reality of the basement. One night, or at least I thought it was night because of the silence that reigned in the house, I had a vivid dream. I saw myself in a sunny park, with a baby in my arms. Martín was next to me, smiling. The dream was so real that when I woke up, the contrast with the darkness of the basement was devastating. I cried for hours, but when the tears dried, I felt renewed. That dream became my lighthouse, the image I clung to in the most difficult moments. As the days passed, I began to lose track of time. The days and nights blended into a continuum of darkness. To maintain a sense of structure, I created an imaginary calendar on the wall, using a piece of metal I found to make marks. Every time I thought a day had passed, I made a new mark. I wasn't sure if my perception of time was accurate, but it gave me a sense of control in an environment where I had none. My daily routine became my anchor. I would wake up, or at least assume it was morning, drink water, do my exercises, recite poetry, sing, explore the basement for anything useful I might have overlooked, and then spend hours trying to find a way to escape. Although each day was essentially the same as the last, maintaining this routine helped me not lose my mind. On one of my tours of the basement, I discovered a box full of old family photos. I recognized Martin as a child, his carefree smile so similar to the one I had fallen in love with. There were also photos of Marta, younger and with a softer expression than the one I knew. I wondered what had happened in her life to make her the woman capable of doing this to me. These photos became my link to the outside world, a reminder that there was a life beyond the basement walls. As my body weakened from lack of proper nutrition, I began to hallucinate. I saw shadows move in the corners of the basement. I listened to voices whispering my name. Part of me knew that they were not real, but another part clung to these visions as if they were company. One afternoon, or what I thought was an afternoon, I heard up noises. My heart accelerated, thinking that finally someone had come to rescue me. I shouted with all my might, hit the door until my hands bled. But no one came. The silence that followed was more deafening than any noise. The disappointment was overwhelming, and for a moment, I felt that all hope abandoned me. But then, I felt a movement in my belly. It was barely noticeable, like the flutter of a butterfly, but it was there. My baby was moving for the first time. Tears began to fall, but this time they were of joy and renewed determination. This little miracle reminded me of why I was fighting, why I couldn't give up. With renewed energies, I examined every corner of the basement. This time, my search paid off. Behind a pile of boxes, I found an old radio. My hands trembled while looking for the batteries and inserted them. For agonizing moments, nothing happened. Then, a weak buzz filled the air. The radio worked. I spent hours adjusting the dial, looking for some signal. Finally, a broken voice left the speakers. It was a news station. I listened avidly, trying to capture any information about the outside world. The date they mentioned surprised me. He had been locked up longer than he thought. The radio became my window to the outside world. Although the reception was poor and the batteries would not last forever, it provided me with a crucial link with reality outside the basement. I listened to the news, the music, even the advertisements with an attention that I had never given before. One night, while listening to the radio, I heard something that froze my blood. The announcer was talking about a disappeared pregnant woman in Buenos Aires. The details match with my case. Martin was looking for me. The police were involved. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of true hope. With this new information, my determination was strengthened. I knew that people were looking for me, that I hadn't been forgotten. This gave me strength to continue fighting, not to give up. I started shouting stronger, hitting the walls with more force, waiting for someone, somewhere, listening to me. The days continued to pass, each one a physical and mental resistance test. My body was weak due to the lack of adequate food, but my spirit refused to break. I have constantly spoke with my baby, promising that we would soon see the sun together, that we would hear his father's voice, that we would feel the wind on our faces. One morning, or what I thought was a morning, I heard a different noise. It was not the usual crunch of the house, nor the buzz of the pipes. It was the sound of steps, from a door opening. My heart beat hard. Would Marta be returning to free me or for something worse? Or would Martin finally back from his trip? With the few forces that left me, I crawled towards the basement door. I inhaled deeply, gathering all the air that my lungs could contain, and shouted. I shouted as I had never shouted before in my life. I shouted Martin's name, I shouted for help, I shouted for my baby. The steps stopped. For a moment, silence was total. Then, I heard the voice that had been yearning to hear during Al's nightmare days. Lucia? Are you there? It was Martin. My Martin had returned. Tears began to fall uncontrollably as he shouted back, confirming that he was here, trapped in the basement. Time had lost all meaning in the darkness of the basement. I didn't know how days exactly had passed, but event second he felt like an eternity. My body was weak due to the lack of adequate food, and my mind roamed between lucidity and delirium. In those moments of clarity, I clung to the hope that Martin will return from his trip to Cordoba. It was during the toes of the vigil periods when I heard a noise that made my heart jump. The unmistakable sound of a key in the main door lock. For a moment, fear paralyzed me. Would Marta return to continue with her cruel plan? But then, I heard a voice that returned me to life. Lucia? Are you at home? Martin's voice echoed on the upper floor, and it was as if a ray of light penetrated the darkness that surrounded me. I gathered all the forces that had left and started screaming. Martin! I'm here. In the base. My voice sounded hoarse and weak even for my own ears, and I feared that it was not strong enough for him to listen to me. The seconds that followed were in agony. Had I heard? Would it eat to look for me? I heard steps moving around the house, and each of them was like a beat in my ears. Lucia? Martin's voice sounded closer now, confusing and worried. Where are you? I hit the door with all the force I could gather, ignoring the pain in my battered hands. Here. In the basement. Your mother locked me. The steps quickly approached the basement door. I heard Martin struggles with the lock, coursing in low voice. Lucia. Are you okay? What happened? Your mother, Martin. She locked me here when you left. Please, take me out of here, I begged, the tears running through my cheeks. Martin's sound fighting with the lock filled the air. Every second he felt like an hour. Finally, with a crunch, the door opened, and the light flooded the basement, blinding me momentarily. Martin was there, his face a mixture of horror and relief. I threw myself into his arm, sobbing uncontrollable. He hugged me strongly, repeating again and again, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I don't understand what happened. Are you okay? Is the baby right? Between sobs, I quickly told him what had happened. How his mother had cheated me to go down to the basement, how I had locked me there, claiming that it was for his good. I saw how Martin's face went from confusion to anger and to a determination he had never seen before. We go to the hospital right now, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. You need to check you and the baby. Martin helped me up the stairs, holding me when my leals, weak for days of inactivity, threatened to fail. The smell of confinement and humidity that had been impregnated in my skin contrasted strongly with the fresh air of the house. While I was guided to the door, I noted that Martin wrinkled my nose. My God, Lucia, what is that smell? It's me, I replied ashamed. I have not been able to bathe in days. Martin's expression softened. It doesn't matter, love. The important thing is that you are safe. Let's go to the hospital. The journey by car to the was surreal hospital. After days in the darkness of the basement, the streets of Buenos Aires seemed too bright, too loud. I clung to Martin as if I were my anchor to reality. In the hospital, doctors acted quickly. They examined me thoroughly, paying special attention to my state of pregnancy. For our relief, the baby was fine. He was dehydrated and malnourished, but the little being inside me had to be as story as his mother. While we expected the results of subdistional tests, Martin did not separate from my side or a moment. His face was a mixture of guilt, love and concerns. "I can't believe that my own mother has done this," he said quietly. "I swear, Lucia, I had no idea. If I had known." "I know," I interrupted him, pressing his hand. "It's not your fault, Martin. You couldn't have known." Martin nodded, but I could see that the fault kept weighing on him. "I've street the police, I have reported me. They are looking for my mother. The idea that Marta was free caused me. Do you think he will try something else?" Martin denied his head firmly. "I will not allow. From now on, I will not let approach you or our baby. Never again." The following days were an activity whirlwind. The police took our statements, a search order for Marta was issued, and we were flooded by visits of friends and family who had heard the news. My family arrived from Rosario, my mother crying and hugging me as if she was afraid of disappearing if I let go. "My girl, my poor girl," I have repeated again and again. My father, a normally stoic man, had red eyes of contained tears. Martin's parents, divorced for years, arrived separately. His father, a quiet and serious man, assured us that he will do everything possible to help in the search for Marta. Martin's mother, on the other hand, was visibly shocked. "I never thought Marta was capable of subject like that," he said, shaking his head disbelief. "It was always difficult, but this is monstrous." As the days passed and my strength returned, we began to face the emotional consequences of what happened. Nightmares were frequent. I woke up screaming, believing that I was still trapped in the basement. Martin was always there, hugging me and making sure he was safe. The psychologist hospital Sug Forest to begin therapy to process trauma. At first, and resisted. I considered myself strong, capable of overcoming this on my own. But with the support of Martin and my family, and finally acted. Therapy sessions were difficult at the beginning. Reliving those dark days in the basement was painful, but little by little, I began to feel that I regained control of my life. My therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, helped me develop strategies to handle the anxiety and fear that still persisted. Martin also began to attend therapy, dealing with his own guilt and confusion about his mother's actions. Together, we learned to communicate better, to support each other in this difficult recovery process. As my pregnancy advanced, our approach began to change. We could no longer allow fear and domain our lives. We had to prepare for the arrival of our baby, to give it a home full of love and security. We decided to move. The house where the incident had happened was full of painful memories. We found a small apartment in Palermo, a neighborhood full of life and color. Painting the walls, choosing new furniture, creating space that was completely ours, was a therapeutic experience in itself. Marta's search continued. Every time the phone sounded, I felt a mixture of hope and fear. Part of me waited them to find it, to face the consequences of their actions. Another part feared what could happen if he returned. One day, while we decorate the baby's room, Martin addressed the theme we had been avoiding. "What will we do if find it?" he asked in a low voice, while hanging a mobile on the crib. I was silent for a moment, stroking my belly increasingly pronounced. "Honestly, I don't know," I finally replicated. "Part of me wants justice, to pay for what he did." "Butter part." "Another part what?" Martin asked softly. "Another part just wants to leave all this behind. Concentrate on our future, in our baby," I admitted. Martin nodded, understanding. "What you decide, I will support you. But I want you to know that, whatever happens pens, I will never allow you to hurt you again. You or our son." Those words, said with such conviction, filled me with a sense of security that I had not felt in a long time. As the delivery date approached, our lives began to acquire new normality. We returned to work, I to my classes at the university, Martin to his office. Our colleagues and students were incredibly comprehensive and supportive. One afternoon, while he gave a class on Garcia Marquez, I felt an individually strong kick from the baby. I stopped in the middle of a phrase, placing a hand on my belly. My students looked at me worried, but I smiled at them to reassure them. It seems that someone is also excited with 100 years of loneliness, I joked, and the class exploded in affectionate laughs. That moment, so simple and everyday, made much I had advanced. She was no longer the terrified woman trapped in a dark basement. She was a survivor, a future mother, strong woman who was rebuilding her life. The day our daughter was born, Sophia, was the happiest day of our lives. Holding her in my arms for the first time, seeing the look of love and amazement on Martin's face, was as if the pain and fear of recent months faded. While rocked Sophia in the room hospital, Martine sat next to me, gently passing her hand through our daughter's dark hair. "It's perfect," he whispered. "It is," I agreed, feeling a wave of love and protection that almost overwhelmed me. "And it's strong. Like us." Martine nodded, with tears in his eyes. "Lucia, I want you to know that I am so proud of you. Of your strength, of your courage. You are the most incredible woman I know." His words moved me deeply. "We are a team, Martine. We overcome this together and raise our daughter together." At that time, with Sophia in my arms and Martin by my side, I felt we were finally complete. We had gone through a terrible test, but we had come stronger, more united. The future was still uncertain in many aspects. Marta was still missing, and we knew that one day we was to face that situation. But for now, we focus on the present, in the miracle of our little family. While Sophia slept peacefully in my arms, and made a silent promise. I promised that, regardless of what the future would bring us, I would always protect my family. That the love and strength that had taken us through this would continue to guide us. And so, with the soft Lucy of Sophia's breathing and Martin's comforting witness, and allowed myself for the first time in a long time, to feel true peace and hope for the future. Martin's return had been my salvation, but the real horror of the situation would only be revealed at the following times. While Martin helped me up the basement stairs, the smell that emanated from me and my improved prison became even more evident. "My God, Lucia," Martin murmured, wrinkling his nose involuntarily. "What is that smell?" I couldn't help feeling ashamed, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. "It's me," I admitted quietly. "I have not been able to clean myself in days." Martine hugged me more strongly, ignoring the stench. "It doesn't matter, my love. The important thing is that you are safe." When we finally reached the upper floor, the daylight that entered through the windows blinded momentarily. After days in the darkness of the basement, even the soft afternoon light seemed too bright. I blinked several times, trying to adjust my view while Martine guided me to the sofa. It was there that I saw my reflection in the mirror of the hall. The image that looked back was almost unrecognizable. My hair was tangled and greasy, my pale and emaciated face, with deep dark circles under my eyes. My clothes were dirty and wrinkled, stained with remains of the humidity of the basement. Martine followed my gaze and I saw how his expression became a mixture of horror and sorrow. "Lucia," began, but the words seemed to fail him. "I'm fine," I said automatically, although we both knew it was a lie. "I just need a shower and submiss." Martine nodded, trying to keep his composure. "Of course. But first, we go to the hospital. We need to make sure that you and the baby are fine." While Martine called an ambulance, I remained sitting on the couch, feeling strangely disconnected from my surroundings. The familiarity of our living room contrasted brutally with the days of confinement that had just lived. Each normal and daily object, the remote television control, the magazines on the coffee table, the photos on the walls, now seemed surreal and alien. The arrival of the paramedics broke my trance. They entered quickly, their professional faces showing only one glimpse of surprise before my appearance. While they examined me and asked questions, I could see Martine in the background, speaking in a low voice with a policeman who had arrived with the ambulance. The trip to the hospital was a blur of sirens and flashing lights. Martine held my hand all the way, his eyes never leaving mine. I have the torment in his gaze, guilt and anger struggling to dominate. In the hospital, I was immediately taken to an exam room. The doctors and nurses work efficiently, doing tests and asking questions. His professionalism was comforting, but he couldn't help noticing the compassion looks they exchanged. The thought he was not looking. The gynecologist arrived shortly after, his serious face while performing an ultrasound. The seconds that passed while looking at the screen were the longest in my life. Finally, I turned to us with a little smile. "The baby is fine," he announced, and felt as if a huge weight rose from my shoulders. "It is a miracle, consider the circumstances, but it seems that your little one is a fighter." Martine and I look at each other, tears running freely for our faces. In the midst of all horror, this news was a ray of hope. While doctors continued with their exams, the police arrived to take our statements. I had to relive every terrifying moment, every endless hour in the darkness of the basement. Martine listened, his face a mask of pain and anger contained. "And it was his mother-in-law who locked her?" asked the office, his incredulous tone. I nodded, feeling how Martin had a tense by my side. "Yes, Marta. She said it was for Martine's good, that she couldn't allow her life to ruin with this baby." The officer took notes, his expression becoming more seriously. "Mr. Rodriguez," he went to Martin, "do you have an idea where your mother could be now?" Martine denied his head, his trembling voice of contained emotion. "No, I have no idea. But I assure you that I will do my best to help find it." After the police left, we were alone in the hospital room. The silence between us was full of emotions and not expressed. Finally, Martine spoke, his voice just a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Lucia. I never imagined. I never thought my mother would be able to subject like that." "It's not your fault, Martine," I said, trying to comfort him. "You couldn't have known." But I could see that my words were recently to relieve their guilt. Martine ran a hand through the hair, a gesture that I collected as a sign of his frustration. "I should have known it, I have insisted. I always knew that my mother was difficult. But this is monstrous." The following days were a whirlwind of medical exams, police visits, and calls from family and worried friends. The news of what happened had spread rapidly, and soon we were flooded with messages of support and help offers. My parents arrived from Rosario, my mother crying uncontrollable while hugging me. "My girl, my poor girl," I have repeated again and again. My father, normally a man of few words, swore that he was used to do everything justice. Marta's search intelliged. His photo appeared in the news, and the office assured us that they were doing everything positive to find her. But with every day that passed without news, I felt my anxiety grow. One night, while lying in the bed hospital, unable to sleep, I heard Martine speaking quietly outside my room. I struggled to listen, collecting his father's voice across the line. "No, I have no idea where it could be," Martine said, his tense voice. "Yes, they already checked their apartment, their summer house, everything. No, I don't think you have more properties." "Argentina?" "I don't know, I could be anywhere." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, and I could feel Martin's growing frustration. When he entered the room again, I treated to be asleep, not wanting to add more to his load. The days became weeks, and little by little, I began to recover my physical strength. The doctors were amazed by my recovery and that of the baby. "You have strong spirit," Anus told me with a kind smile. "And your little one seems to have inherited that force." But although my body was cursed, my mind was still tormented. The nightmares were frequent, waking me up in the middle of the night, shouting and sweating. Martine was always there, hugging me and whispering words of comfort, but I could see the pain in his eyes event time this happened. The psychologist hospital Sug Forest to begin therapy to process trauma. At first, and resisted. I consider myself a strong person, capable of overcoming this on my own. But with the support of Martine and my family, and finally acted. The first sessions were difficult. Reviewing the moments of terror in the basement, facing my fears and anxieties, was emotionally exhausting. But little by little, I began to feel that I regained control of my life. Martine also began to attend therapy, dealing with his own guilt and confusion about his mother's actions. Together, we learned to communicate better, to support each other in this difficult recovery process. An afternoon, while we walked around the hospital, doctors had suggested that the soft exercise would be good for me and the baby. Martin addressed a theme we had been avoiding. "Lucia," he began, his soft but serious voice. "I've been thinking. Maybe we should move." I stopped, surprised by the suggestion. "Move ourselves? Where?" Martine shrugged. "Wherever it is. Far from here, far from, of memories. We could start over, in a place where no one knows our history." I considered his proposal in silence for a few moments. Part of me longed to escape, leave behind all the horror we had lived. "Both are part." "No," I finally said, even surprising myself. "We are not going to flee. This is our house, our life. We will not let what mother did take that too." Martine looked at me, a mixture of surprise and admiration on his face. "Are you sure? After everything you have happened?" I nodded, feeling a determination that I had not felt in weeks. "I am sure. We are stronger than this, Martine. We will not let fear control us." That night, while we had dinner at the coffee hospital, doctors had finally allowed me a normal diet. We discussed our plans for the future. We decided that, although we was not move, we was use makeup changes in our house. We will renew the basement, Martine Sug Forest. We will turn it into a bright and cozy space. Maybe baby room for the baby when it grows. The idea of transforming the place of my nightmares into a space for joy and children's laughter filled me with a feeling of triumph. "I love that idea," I said, smiling for the first time in what seemed an eternity. As my discharge date approached, I began to feel a mixture of emotion and anxiety about the perspective of return home. The doctors and my therapist assured me that it was normal to feel that way, and they gave me strategies to hand any anxiety that could arise. The day before my high, we received an unexpected visit. The detective in charge of the search for Marta arrived at the hospital, her serious face but with a brightness of hope in her eyes. "Lord and Mrs. Rodriguez," he began, "we have new information about the whereabouts of Marta Rodriguez." Martine and I looked at each other, a mixture of fear and anticipation touring our bodies. "Have you found her?" Martin asked, his tense voice. The detective nodded. "We believe yes. We have recovered reports that it was a small town in the province of Misiones. We are coordinating with the local police for its arrest." The news hit us like a tsunami. After weeks of uncertainty, the idea that Marta could finally be captured was almost overwhelming. "What will happen when they find it?" I asked, my voice just a whisper. "He will be arrested and brought back to Buenos Aires to face charges," explained the detective. "Homicide attempt, kidnapping, among others. We will keep you report of any development." After the detective left, Martin and I were silent for a long time, processing the information. Finally, Martine spoke, his voice full of emotion. "Lucia, I don't know how to face this. She is my mother, but what he did to you. What he did to us." I hugged him strongly, feeling his tears wet my shoulder. "We will face it together, Martine. As we have done everything so far." That night, while I prepared for my last dream in the hospital, I reflect on everything that happened. The horror of the confinement, the miracle of my rescue, the force I had discovered in myself and in my relationship with Martine. And now, the possibility of closing, justice. I stroked my belly, feeling the baby's movements. We are strong, I whispered. And whatever happens Pens, we will always have each other. With that promise in my heart, I fell asleep, ready to face what the future could bring. The darkest chapter of our life was coming to an end, but out in history, the story of our little family was barely starting. The day of my hospital discharge marked the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. While Martin helped me to enter the car, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Returning home meant facing the memories of the horror he had lived, but it was also a step towards recovery and normality. The trip from the hospital to our house was silent. Martine drove carefully, throwing me from worrying from time to time. I looked out the window, watching family streets of Buenos Aires with new eyes. Each traffic light, every corner, seemed a reminder of freedom that had lost and recovered. When I got home, I stopped at the entrance, my heart beating hard. Martine squeezed my hand gently. "I'm here with you," I murmured. "We can take our time." I took a deep breath and took a step forward. The interior of the house was clean and tidy. Martine had spent hours making sure everything was perfect for my return. However, I could not prevent my eyes from divert towards the basement door. Martine, nivering my gaze, hastened to say, "I have changed the lock and reinforced the door. No one can lock you again." I nodded, grateful for their consideration, but knowing that the true scars were in my mind, not at home. The first days at home were a challenge. Each noise startled me, and the nights were a battle against nightmares. Martine was my rock, always present, always patient. I held me during my panic attacks and reminded me of breathing when anxiety threatened to overwhelm my elf. Our daily routine became an anchor. We had breakfast together every morning, Martine preparing toasted with homemade jam and I made. We talked about our plans for the day, about the baby, about anything except the incident and the ongoing search of Marta. Therapy became a crucial part of our life. 3 times a week, I visited Dr. Fernandez, through therapist. At first, I resisted opening my emotional wounds, but little by little, I began to see the benefits. "Lucia," Dr. Fernandez told me in one of our sessions, "the healing process is not linear. There will be good days and bad days. The important thing is that you keep moving forward." Martine also continued with his own therapy, dealing with the guilt and confusion he felt for his mother's actions. Together, we learned communication techniques that helped us support each other in difficult times. As my pregnancy advanced, I found a new source of strength and purpose. Each kick of the baby, every visit to the obstetrician, was a reminder of the life that grew with me, a life that had survived against all prognosis. We decided to the basement, turning the place of my nightmares into a space of hope. With the help of friends and family, we paint the walls of bright colors, we install better lighting and fill it with toys and books for the baby. Each brushstroke, each new furniture, was an act of claim and healing. One day, while we organized the baby's room, Martine suddenly stopped, holding a small stuffed bears. "Lucia," he said gently, "do you think we can tell our about all this?" The question took me by surprise. Until that time, I had not thought about how our experiences would affect our in the future. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But I think, when the time comes, we will find a way to do it. With love and honesty." Martine nodded, his eyes shining with unabled tears. "You are right. Our son will know that he comes from a strong family, who overcame the impossible." Marta's search continued. Every few days, we received police updates. They had seen her in Misiones, then in Corrientes, always one step ahead of the authorities. Each news brought a mixture of anxiety and relief, anxiety to know he was still free, relief that he wasn't around. One afternoon, while we were drinking mate on the balcony, Martine broached the topic we had been avoiding. "What will we do if they find her?" he asked quietly. I was silent for a moment, contemplating the question. "I want justice," I finally said. "But I also want to understand. Understand how a mother could do something like that." Martin nodded slowly. I want to understand too. But I don't know if we can ever really do it. As the weeks went by, I began to feel a change in me. Constant fear began to give way to calm determination. I was no longer startled by every noise, and the nightmares, although still present, were less frequent. I returned to work, resuming my classes at the university. My students and colleagues welcomed me with support and understanding. Teaching literature classes became a form of therapy. Immersing myself in stories of resilience and improvement gave me strength. One day, while we were discussing 100 Years of Solitude in class, a student raised her hand. "Professor," he said, "do you think it is possible to forgive the unforgivable?" The question took my breath away for a moment. I thought about Marta, about what she had done to me, about the pain she had caused. I believe, I responded slowly, that forgiveness is a process, not a destination. Sometimes, we forgive not to free the other, but to free ourselves. That night, I shared the conversation with Martine. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive your mother completely," I admitted. "But I'm learning not to let hate consume me." Martine hugged me tightly. "You are the strongest person I know, Lucia. And our son will have the best mother in the world." As the due date approached, our focus changed. We were no longer consumed by thinking about Marta and the past. Instead, we focused on preparing for our baby's arrival. We attend childbirth classes, decorate the baby's room, choose names. The day our daughter, Sophia, was born was the happiest day of our lives. Holding her in my arms for the first time, seeing the look of love and wonder on Martin's face, it was like all the pain and fear of the past few months melted away. "She's perfect," Martine whispered, gently caressing Sophia's small hand. "It is," I agreed, feeling a surge of love and protection that almost overwhelmed me. "And he's strong. Like us." The first few months with Sophia were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, diapers, and a happiness I had never experienced before. Every smile, every little accomplishment from our daughter, was a reminder of why we had fought so hard. It was during this time that we received the news we had been both waiting for and fearing. Marta had finally been captured in a small town on the border with Paraguay. The police informed us that she would be extradited to Buenos Aires to face the charges. The news left us in a state of shock. On the one hand, we were relieved that she had finally been found. On the other, we knew this meant we would have to face everything again, statements, trials, reliving the trauma. "We don't have to do it if you don't want to," Martine said one night, as we rocked Sophia to sleep. "We could just let justice take its course without our involvement." I considered her words for a moment, looking at our daughter's peaceful face. "No," I finally said. "We need to close this chapter. For us and for Sophia. She deserves to grow up in a world where justice prevails." Martin nodded, his eyes full of love and admiration. "Together, then." As always. The day of judgment came sooner than we expected. Walking into the courtroom, seeing Marta for the first time since the incident, was one of the hardest things I have ever done. She was thinner, her hair, previously dyed a perfect blonde, showing gray roots. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a mixture of defiance and something I couldn't place. Remorse, perhaps? During the trial, I heard expert testimony, saw evidence, and relived my experience through my own testimony. Martine was by my side at all times, his presence a constant source of support. When it was time for Marta to speak, the silence in the room was palpable. His voice, previously strong and commanding, sounded broken as he began to speak. "I did it for my son," he said, his eyes fixed on Martin. "I thought I was protecting your future. Now I see. I was wrong. Terribly wrong." His words, although late, had a profound impact on all of us. I saw Martin tense beside me, his conflicting emotions evident on his face. The trial lasted weeks, each day bringing new revelations and emotions. When the verdict finally came, it felt like an enormous weight was lifted from my shoulders. Marta was found guilty and sentenced to several years in prison. We left the courthouse in silence, holding hands. It wasn't until we got home, where my mother was waiting for us with Sophia, that the emotions finally caught up with us. The three of us hugged each other, crying and laughing at the same time, while Sophia looked at us with her big curious eyes. In the months and years that followed, we continued our healing process. Therapy continued to be an important part of our lives, helping us process our emotions and strengthen our relationship. We decided to write a book about our experience, not to seek fame or attention, but to help others who might be going through similar situations. The writing process was therapeutic, allowing us to confront and overcome aspects of our experience that we had not yet fully addressed. Sophia grew up becoming a strong and compassionate girl. When she was old enough, we told her a watered-down version of what had happened, emphasizing the importance of love, family, and resilience. One day, when Sophia was 6 years old, she surprised me with a question. "Mom," she said, while coloring at the kitchen table, "will we ever see Grandma Marta?" The question caught me off guard. Martine and I had discussed the possibility, but we had never reached a decision. I looked at Martine, who had entered the kitchen just in time to hear the question. "We don't know, honey," Martine responded, sitting next to Sophia. "Grandma Marta did something very bad and she is paying for it. But forgiveness and compassion are important things too." Sophia nodded, processing the information with a maturity that surprised me. "I think we should visit her," he finally said. "Everyone deserves a second chance, right?" His words left us breathless. Martin and I looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between us. Maybe, I thought, our daughter was teaching us an important lesson about forgiveness and redemption. "We'll think about it," I finally said, hugging Sophia. "For now, the most important thing is that we are together and we love each other." That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Martine and I sat on the balcony, as we had done so many times before. The Buenos Aires sky was full of stars, and for a moment, we simply sat in silence, grateful for everything we had overcome. "Do you think we should?" Martin finally asked. "Visiting my mother?" I took a deep breath, considering the question. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I think Sophia is right. Maybe it's time to consider forgiveness. Not for Marta, but for us." Martin nodded slowly. "Together," he said, taking my hand. As usual. As we looked at the stars, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. We had been through hell and survived. We had built a beautiful and strong family. And now, perhaps, we were ready for the next chapter of our story. The future was uncertain, but he no longer feared it. I knew that no matter what came, we would face it together. Our story, which began with horror and despair, had become a testament of love, strength, and resilience. And so, under the starry sky of Buenos Aires, Martine and I hugged each other, grateful for the present and hopeful for the future. Our story of survival and recovery would continue, but now, with each day, we wrote a new chapter filled with love, forgiveness, and the joy of watching our daughter grow.